There are moments in life when a room full of hardened warriors suddenly goes quiet. Like even the air itself realizes something extraordinary is about to happen. That's exactly what unfolded one afternoon inside a Marine Corps training facility when a decorated general of the Marines made what he thought was a harmless joke. He was walking through the briefing room, stopping beside a young woman sitting straight back in her chair. She looked out of place to him, smaller than the others, quiet, her dress blues pressed to perfection. He chuckled as if to break the tension and asked, "What's your call sign, Captain?" The way he said it, you could tell he didn't expect much. Maybe a nickname the team had given her. Maybe something funny. The room smirked. Some even snickered under their breath. But when she looked up, calm and unflinching, and said two words, "Steel Phoenix," the laughter died. The general froze, the color draining from his face. His hand, mid-gesture, fell limp to his side. You could have heard a pin drop, because suddenly every Marine in that room realized they weren't sitting next to just another officer. They were sitting next to a legend, one whose reputation carried a weight darker and heavier than any metal pin to a chest. The general wasn't laughing anymore. In fact, he staggered back like someone had struck him in the gut. He knew that name. He knew what it meant. And the truth was, Steel Phoenix wasn't a call sign you joked about. It was a warning. The general wasn't the kind of man who got shaken easily. He'd served in more than a dozen combat deployments, led operations that were never written down in history books, and sat across tables from presidents and generals. He was iron-willed, feared, respected, and in some circles whispered about like a myth. So when he asked that young officer her call sign, he was expecting something light. Sparrow maybe, or Pixie, something the guys had given her to poke fun at her size or her quiet nature. That's how things usually went. But Steel Phoenix, that wasn't a nickname. That was a story. And it was a story every seasoned operator in that room had at least heard of, even if they didn't believe the details. The call sign belonged to a figure who'd operated in the shadows of Black Ops theaters. Someone whose missions were classified beyond top secret. Someone whose reputation wasn't carried on paper, but in hushed tones between Marines over drinks. And now she was here, sitting at a table, like it was just another day at the office. The general tried to regain his composure, but his mind was racing back to the first time he'd heard that name. It was in Afghanistan years ago during a debrief after a disastrous ambush in the mountains. His Marines had been pinned, outnumbered, their situation hopeless until a marksman team on the ridge started cutting through enemy commanders one by one. The story went that 3 generals dropped in less than 4 minutes, all from impossible distances. By the time reinforcements arrived, the ambush had collapsed. Nobody saw her face. Nobody even knew for sure if it had been a woman at all. But the call sign had spread like wildfire. Steel Phoenix. Some said it was because she left battlefields littered with leaders who never made it home. Some said it was because she'd lost someone herself and turned that grief into unshakable steel. Whatever the truth was, one thing remained certain. Wherever Steel Phoenix appeared, enemies fell and survivors never forgot. Now staring at the calm young captain in front of him, the general realized the myth was flesh and blood, and she was sitting in his briefing room. The general forced himself to sit down, though his knees felt heavier than they had in years. Across the table, the young captain didn't flinch. She didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She just looked at him with those steady eyes. The kind of eyes you only got after staring at the wrong end of a battlefield too many times. He cleared his throat, tried to speak, but the words stuck. The rest of the room was still. The younger Marine candidates were clueless. They didn't understand why their commander suddenly looked rattled. But the older ones, a couple of them, had exchanged glances. They knew. The general remembered the whispers that had circulated through special operations circles over the past decade. Whispers about a woman who could outshoot any marksman, outthink any commander, and outlast missions most Marines wouldn't even accept. She didn't operate for glory. She didn't care about medals. Her work was done in shadows, and her victories were measured in the silence after chaos. Her file, what little of it was unredacted, was legendary. She joined the Marines straight out of college, bright, disciplined, and with a rifle marksmanship score that raised eyebrows immediately. By the time most were still learning to navigate base protocols, she was already volunteering for advanced training. She pushed into areas no one expected her to succeed in, not because she wanted to prove anyone wrong, but because she wanted to test herself. During one mission in Helmand Province, her squad had been cornered. Commanders had already written them off as lost. But she'd held her position on a ridge for nearly 18 hours, picking off enemy leaders with a calm precision that didn't seem human. When her team finally broke free, survivors swore they'd never seen anything like it. The call sign was born that day, muttered half in awe and half in fear. It stuck because she never chased it. She never tried to make herself a legend. The name spread on its own, fueled by stories that blurred the line between truth and myth. And now here she was, ordered into this new training program, sitting quietly like she was just another face in uniform. To most, she might have seemed ordinary. To the general, she was a living ghost, a reminder of missions gone sideways, of enemies who never lived to brag, and of allies who owed their lives to a single unseen rifle. For the first time in his career, the general realized he might have underestimated someone, not just as an officer, but as a force of nature. Most call signs came from inside jokes or bad luck. A clumsy landing, a broken radio, something the team never let you live down. But Steel Phoenix wasn't a joke. It was born out of blood. Years before she ever sat in that briefing room, she'd had a twin brother. Her other half was a fellow Marine, a force recon operator who'd been killed by an IED during a mission overseas. She never spoke of it, never used his name, but everyone in her unit knew. They said she never took off his dog tags, even on deployments. They said the grief hardened her, turned her into steel. And when she started dropping high-value targets one after another, the nickname spread. Phoenix wasn't just about her loss. It was about the trail of eliminated threats she left behind in enemy ranks. She never missed. She never hesitated. She carried the weight of her own heartbreak into every mission, and it made her unstoppable. The general remembered hearing about it during a debrief in Quantico. Commanders had whispered the story like it was folklore, a woman who fought with the fury of someone who had nothing left to lose. He hadn't believed it back then. He thought it was an exaggeration, a campfire tale meant to boost morale. But now, looking at her across the table, he saw the truth. The steady posture, the quiet strength, the eyes of someone who had carried loss and turned it into fuel. And in that moment, the general wasn't just shocked. He was humbled. The briefing room was silent, every eye bouncing between the general and the captain, who had just uttered those two heavy words. The younger candidates shifted uncomfortably, still not fully understanding. To them, she was just another officer with a sharp uniform and a calm stare. But the older veterans at the table knew better. Their silence was a kind of respect, a recognition that the woman sitting among them wasn't just a Marine, but a living piece of legend. The general leaned back, finally collecting himself. He forced a dry smile, but it didn't hide the tremor in his voice. "So, they sent you here." She didn't nod, didn't answer. She simply held his gaze as if to say, "Does it matter? I'm here now." In that moment, the general felt something he hadn't felt in decades. Uncertainty. This wasn't just another briefing, another training cycle. This was a test. A reminder that even men like him, decorated and seasoned, weren't beyond being surprised. The rest of the candidates sat straighter, sensing the weight of what had just passed between their leader and their new teammate. The tension was thick, unspoken, but undeniable. Everyone knew things had changed. And in that silence, a truth settled over the room like dust on a battlefield. The name Steel Phoenix wasn't a boast. It wasn't a story. It was a reality, and they were about to see it for themselves. The atmosphere in the Marine Corps facility had shifted completely. What started as routine introductions had become something else entirely. The casual conversations that filled briefing rooms before exercises had evaporated, replaced by a reverent quiet that seemed to acknowledge the presence of something extraordinary. Junior Marines who moments before had been joking and checking their phones now sat with the focused attention of students in the presence of a master. The older Marines understood what they were witnessing. This wasn't just about rank or experience. This was about the difference between reputation built on politics and legend forged in blood. Steel Phoenix had earned her place through actions that most would never attempt, let alone survive. The general struggled to reconcile what he thought he knew with what now sat before him. For decades, he'd operated under certain assumptions about capability, about who belonged where, about what excellence looked like. He'd built his career on reading people, on understanding their potential and limitations. But here was someone who shattered every assumption he'd held about quiet officers and overlooked talents. The weight of that realization pressed against him like a physical force. How many others had he dismissed? How many legends had he failed to recognize because they didn't fit his expectations? The questions formed an uncomfortable knot in his chest, challenging not just his judgment, but his entire worldview about leadership and recognition. Steel Phoenix sat motionless, offering no comfort for his discomfort, no reassurance for his uncertainty. She simply existed in the space, a reminder that some truths required no explanation or justification. The silence stretched on, heavy with implications that reached far beyond this single briefing room. Every Marine present was processing the same uncomfortable realization that excellence often wore masks they hadn't learned to recognize. That the quiet ones, the overlooked ones, might carry capabilities that exceeded their wildest expectations. The general's hands trembled slightly as he reached for his coffee, the simple motion betraying the earthquake happening inside his certainties. This wasn't just about one extraordinary officer. This was about the systematic failure to see, to recognize, to value what didn't fit predetermined molds. Steel Phoenix represented every underestimated warrior who'd been passed over, every quiet professional who'd been dismissed, every legend who'd operated in shadows while lesser talents claimed the spotlight. The weight settling over the room wasn't just respect for her individual achievements. It was the crushing recognition of how much potential had been wasted, how many opportunities squandered through blind assumptions. And in that moment, everyone understood that they had witnessed something that would change them forever. Steel Phoenix hadn't spoken beyond those two words, hadn't boasted or demanded recognition. She had simply existed, and her existence had rewritten the rules of what they thought they knew about capability and worth. The general would never again look at a quiet officer and assume weakness. The younger Marines would carry this lesson into their own leadership roles, remembering the day they learned that legends don't announce themselves with fanfare. They prove themselves through action, sacrifice, and excellence that speaks louder than any proclamation. True capability recognizes no boundaries except those imposed by fear and ignorance. The greatest warriors often operate in silence, their worth measured not in medals displayed, but in lives saved, missions accomplished, and enemies who never lived to tell their tales. Steel Phoenix was proof that excellence, when given the chance, will always rise to meet the moment. That afternoon in the Marine Corps briefing room became legend itself, whispered in training facilities and officer clubs across the globe.